this story is about. In a small town, Harper discovers an old house rumored to be haunted. Intrigued by the mystery, she uncovers the dark history of the Whitaker family and the ritual that awakened the evil force within the house. As her investigation deepens, Harper realizes that she herself is the key to that power. What began as a search for truth turns into a fight for survival as she faces a terrifying entity, coming to the horrifying realization that some doors are better left closed. If you enjoy thrilling, suspenseful stories that keep your heart racing, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps bring these tales to life, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. If you have a story, experience, or eerie event from your life, feel free to share the chills with us through the email listed in the description. Now, here's the full story.
The road stretched endlessly ahead, flanked by towering pines that seemed to reach the heavens. Harper tightened her grip on the steering wheel, the pale winter sunlight casting fragmented shadows across her dashboard. Her car, an aging hatchback, hummed steadily as it climbed the winding roads of Oregon's backcountry. She hadn't planned to be here, at least not like this. 3 weeks ago, Harper had been in her bustling city apartment, surrounded by the chaos of her career as an investigative journalist. But the weight of her latest story, a scandal involving corporate greed and a tragic suicide, had cracked something inside her. That, coupled with the grief she still carried from her sister's death 2 years ago, had left her hollow. So, when she stumbled across the listing for a secluded, affordable rental deep in the woods, she seized it like a drowning woman clutching a lifeline. The house came into view suddenly, its silhouette sharp against the overcast sky. It stood at the end of a gravel path, surrounded by overgrown shrubbery and skeletal trees. The air seemed colder here, heavier, as though the forest itself held its breath. Harper parked and stepped out, her boots crunching against the frost-kissed ground. The house loomed before her, a weathered 2-story structure with peeling paint and boarded-up windows on the upper floor. The porch sagged slightly, its railings adorned with moss and cobwebs. "This is home now," she muttered under her breath, though the words sounded hollow. She unlocked the door, the key turning with a reluctant click, and stepped inside. The air smelled of damp wood and mildew. Dust motes danced in the pale light streaming through the grimy windows. The interior was sparse, a threadbare couch in the living room, a wooden table in the kitchen, and a staircase leading to the second floor. Harper dropped her bag by the door and exhaled deeply. She had told herself this was what she needed, a break from the noise and the demands of city life. Yet standing in the silence of the house, she felt a pang of unease. That night, the unease blossomed into something more sinister. Harper had always been a light sleeper, and the creaks and groans of the old house kept her teetering on the edge of wakefulness. She lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, when she first heard it, a faint whispering. At first, she dismissed it as wind seeping through the gaps in the walls. But the sound persisted, low and rhythmic, like a voice speaking just beyond the range of comprehension. Harper sat up, her heart thudding. "Hello," she called, her voice breaking the heavy silence. The whispering stopped. For a long moment, she stayed frozen, straining her ears. But there was only silence. Shaking her head, she lay back down, convincing herself it was just her imagination, or perhaps a dream. The whispers returned the next night. This time they were louder, more distinct. She could make out fragments of words, though they made no sense. They know, it's not safe. She's here. The voice seemed to come from the walls themselves, shifting locations as though the house were breathing. Harper's unease deepened. She spent the next day inspecting the house, searching for rational explanations. She found none. The walls were solid, the windows intact. No signs of drafts or hidden speakers. Yet that night, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before. On the third day, Harper discovered the trapdoor. She had been pacing the living room, trying to ignore the gnawing dread that had settled in her chest, when her foot caught on a loose floorboard. Kneeling down, she pried it open to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside was a rusted metal handle. Curiosity overpowered caution. She pulled the handle, and the floor groaned as a section of it lifted, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. A cold draft wafted up, carrying the scent of earth and decay. Harper hesitated, but something, perhaps the journalist in her, compelled her to descend. She grabbed a flashlight from her bag and began the descent, her footsteps echoing against the stone walls. At the bottom was a small, cramped room. The air was thick and suffocating, the only light coming from Harper's flashlight. She swept the beam across the space, revealing scattered items. A pile of old photographs, a wooden doll with a grotesque, smiling face, and a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The letters were brittle, the ink faded, but Harper could make out enough to piece together fragments of a story. They spoke of a family who had lived in the house decades ago, a husband, a wife, and their young daughter, Annabelle. The last letter was from the wife to a friend, describing strange occurrences. Annabelle talking to someone who wasn't there, doors opening and closing on their own, and an oppressive presence that seemed to watch them at all hours. Harper felt a chill crawl down her spine. The whispers suddenly felt much closer. She turned to leave, but froze. The doll had moved. It now sat upright, its painted eyes staring directly at her. Harper stumbled back, her flashlight trembling in her hand. She blinked, trying to convince herself that she hadn't seen the doll move, that it was some trick of her imagination or the dim light. But there was. The grotesque wooden doll now sat upright, its crooked grin stretched unnaturally wide. Its painted eyes, chipped and faded, seemed to follow her every move. No, Harper whispered to herself. This isn't real. The air in the small room seemed heavier now, pressing against her chest. The whispers started again, faint and disjointed, echoing off the damp stone walls. Ghost stay she knows. Harper backed up the stairs, nearly tripping in her haste. She didn't look back, not even when she felt a gust of cold air rush past her, as though something had followed her out of the basement. Back in the living room, she slammed the trapdoor shut and dragged the old couch over it, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. She leaned against the wall, trying to steady herself, but the whispers didn't stop. They were louder now, more insistent, filling the room like a low chant. Why won't it stop? Harper muttered, clutching her head. She spent the rest of the night in the kitchen, huddled in a chair with every light in the house turned on. The whispers eventually faded, but the silence that followed was no comfort. It felt alive, pulsating with unseen tension. The next day, Harper drove into town. She needed answers, or at least some semblance of normalcy. The town of Blackwood was small and unremarkable, its streets lined with weathered storefronts and sleepy diners. Harper parked near the library, a modest brick building that looked as old as the house she was renting. Inside, the librarian, a wiry woman with sharp eyes, greeted her with a polite but distant smile. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for information about an old house," Harper said. "It's out past the woods on Birch Hollow Road." The librarian's smile faltered. "That house? You're staying there?" Harper nodded, her unease growing. "Why? What do you know about it?" The woman hesitated, glancing around as though afraid someone might overhear. Finally, she leaned in and lowered her voice. "They call it the Whispering House. People say it's cursed. Cursed? Harper echoed, her skepticism tinged with curiosity. There have been incidents, the librarian continued. Families disappearing, strange accidents. And before that, back in the 1940s, there was a little girl, Annabelle. Harper's stomach twisted. What happened to her? No one knows, the librarian said, her voice barely above a whisper. One day, she was just gone. Her parents searched everywhere, but it was as if she vanished into thin air. Some people say she still haunts the place, trying to find her way back. Harper left the library with more questions than answers. She spent the afternoon poring over old newspaper archives, uncovering fragments of the house's dark history. The disappearance of Annabelle had made headlines, but the story ended abruptly, with no resolution. There were other reports too. Families moving in and leaving just as quickly, claiming the house was wrong. One man had reportedly gone mad, ranting about voices in the walls before disappearing himself. As Harper drove back to the house, the forest seemed darker, the trees more imposing. The whispers returned as soon as she stepped inside, no longer confined to the night. She tried to ignore them, focusing instead on her research. She spread the letters, photographs, and articles across the kitchen table, trying to piece together a timeline. But the whispers grew louder, demanding her attention. She's here, she knows it's too late. Harper slammed her fists on the table. "What do you want from me?" she shouted. For the first time, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening, stretching on for what felt like an eternity. Then a single word broke through the stillness. "Leave." That night, Harper dreamed of Annabelle. She was standing in the middle of the living room, her back to Harper. Her long, dark hair hung in tangled strands, and her small frame was wrapped in a white dress stained with dirt. "Annabelle," Harper called softly. The girl turned, and Harper's breath caught. Annabelle's face was pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow voids that seemed to suck in the light. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Then, the whispers began again, louder and more chaotic than ever. They filled the room, the walls, Harper's mind, until she woke up screaming. The next day, Harper discovered something even more disturbing. While cleaning the dust-covered shelves in the living room, she found a diary hidden behind a row of old books. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed, but the handwriting inside was clear and precise. It belonged to Eleanor Whitaker, the house's original owner. Eleanor's diary detailed her descent into madness, or perhaps something far worse. She wrote of strange symbols she found etched into the trees in the forest, of dreams filled with voices calling her name. "I hear them at night," one entry read. "They whisper secrets, promises of power. They say I can bring her back." Harper's hands trembled as she turned the pages. The entries became more erratic, the handwriting jagged and uneven. The final page was smeared with what looked like dried blood, the words scrawled in frantic loops. "She is the key. The house must hold her. The house must keep her." Harper stared at the page, the words blurring as a chill settled over her. For the first time, she considered leaving, but something inside her refused. She needed to know the truth, even if it destroyed her. The next few days passed in a haze of whispers and shadows. Harper barely slept, her mind consumed by the fragments of history she had uncovered. The house seemed to pulse with a life of its own, each creak and groan feeding her paranoia. The diary had opened a door, both figuratively and literally. Harper couldn't shake the feeling that the trapdoor in the living room was calling to her, beckoning her back to the hidden room beneath the floorboards. On the fourth night, she gave in. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, Harper moved the couch away from the trapdoor and descended into the basement once more. The air was colder this time, the whispers louder. "She's coming, it's time." The words twisted through the air like smoke, curling around her ears and sinking into her mind. Harper ignored them, forcing herself to focus. She examined the room more thoroughly this time, sifting through the scattered items with growing unease. Beneath the pile of photographs, she found a small, leather-bound book. Its cover was embossed with strange symbols, and its pages were filled with incomprehensible diagrams and incantations. A chill ran down her spine as she flipped through the book. It was a grimoire, a spell book. The whispers grew frantic, overlapping into a cacophony of voices. Harper clutched the book to her chest and scrambled back up the stairs. Back in the safety of the living room, she examined the grimoire under the harsh glare of a desk lamp. Most of it was indecipherable, written in a language she didn't recognize. But a few pages had notes scrawled in the margins, written in the same handwriting as Eleanor's diary. "They say she is the vessel," one note read. "She must remain, or the house will fall." Another passage sent shivers down Harper's spine. The whispers are not hers. They belong to the house. They will take her. They will take me. Harper's grip on the book tightened. She couldn't ignore the evidence any longer. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive. Over the next few days, Harper's obsession deepened. She spent hours poring over the grimoire and the diary, piecing together fragments of Eleanor's story. Eleanor had been a widow, grieving the loss of her only daughter, Annabelle. Desperate to bring her child back, she had turned to the occult, performing rituals in the forest and carving strange symbols into the trees. But something had gone wrong. The whispers had come, followed by strange phenomena, objects moving on their own, shadowy figures appearing in the corners of her vision. The final ritual had sealed Annabelle's fate, and perhaps Eleanor's as well. The girl had become a vessel, bound to the house for eternity. The whispers became more insistent as Harper delved deeper into the house's secrets. They no longer confined themselves to the walls, now echoing in her mind even when she was outside. One night, she woke to find herself standing in the middle of the living room, clutching the grimoire. She didn't remember getting out of bed. Another time, she found muddy footprints trailing from the front door to the trapdoor in the floor. They were small, too small to be hers. On the sixth night, the nightmares began. In her dreams, Harper found herself wandering through the forest, the trees twisted and gnarled like skeletal hands. The whispers surrounded her, growing louder with every step. She came to a clearing where a figure stood with its back to her. It was Annabelle, her long hair obscuring her face. "Annabelle," Harper called. The girl turned, and Harper's stomach churned. Annabelle's face was pale and hollow, her eyes black pits that seemed to swallow the moonlight. Her mouth opened, but no words came out, only a low, guttural growl. Harper woke with a start, drenched in sweat. But the whispers didn't stop. They followed her into the waking world, louder and more chaotic than ever. Driven to the edge, Harper decided to confront the house. She took the grimoire and the diary, along with a can of lighter fluid and a box of matches. Her plan was simple: destroy the books, destroy the trapdoor, and leave. But as she poured the lighter fluid over the grimoire, the whispers became a roar. The walls trembled, the lights flickered, and the air grew thick with the smell of decay. "You can't leave," the voices hissed. Harper lit a match and dropped it onto the book. The flames leapt up, consuming the pages in an instant. But instead of relief, she felt a surge of dread. The whispers turned into screams. The floorboards cracked, the windows shattered, and the trapdoor burst open. Something emerged from the darkness, a figure cloaked in shadows, its eyes glowing with malevolent light. "Leave," it rasped, its voice a twisted mockery of human speech. "You belong to us now." The figure loomed over Harper, its shadow stretching across the room like a living void. Its glowing eyes bore into hers, and she felt an overwhelming pressure, as if the air itself were trying to crush her. Harper stumbled backward, her legs colliding with the overturned couch. The flames consuming the grimoire flickered and died, leaving only the acrid smell of smoke in the air. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised an arm, long and gnarled, with fingers that ended in jagged claws, and pointed toward the trapdoor. Harper shook her head. "No, I'm not going back down there." The whispers erupted again, a deafening cacophony that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Harper clapped her hands over her ears, but it was no use. The voices were inside her head, clawing at her sanity. She's here, the vessel. The trapdoor flew open, slamming against the floor with a force that sent vibrations through the house. A gust of cold air surged up from the basement, carrying with it the stench of decay and something ancient, something wrong. Harper tried to resist, but her body betrayed her. Her legs moved on their own, dragging her toward the gaping maw of the trapdoor. She clawed at the floor, her fingernails splintering against the rough wood, but it was no use. The darkness swallowed her whole. When Harper opened her eyes, she was no longer in the basement. She was standing in the forest, clearing from her nightmares. The trees loomed overhead, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sky. The air was heavy and still, and the only sound was the faint rustling of leaves. Ahead of her stood Annabelle. The girl's back was to her, just as it had been in the dream. "Annabelle," Harper whispered, her voice barely audible. The girl turned slowly, and Harper's breath caught in her throat. Annabelle's face was even more grotesque now, pale and waxy, with deep cracks running through her skin like dried clay. Her eyes were voids, her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. "You shouldn't have come here," the girl said, her voice layered with the echoes of countless others. "I just wanted to know the truth," Harper said, taking a cautious step forward. Annabelle tilted her head, her grin widening. "The truth? You can't handle the truth." Before Harper could respond, the ground beneath her feet shifted. The forest dissolved, and she was back in the house, but it wasn't the same. The walls were covered in black, pulsating veins, and the air was thick with the sound of whispers. The entity appeared again, its glowing eyes fixed on Harper. This time it spoke. "You sought the truth," it said, its voice a low, guttural growl. "Now you will see." The room around her shifted, and Harper found herself in the past. She was standing in the living room, watching as Eleanor Whitaker performed a ritual. The woman knelt on the floor, carving symbols into the wood with a knife. Blood dripped from her hands, and her face was twisted with desperation. "Bring her back," Eleanor whispered over and over again. "Bring my baby back." The air shimmered, and another scene unfolded. This time, Harper saw Annabelle playing in the yard, her laughter echoing through the trees. But the laughter turned to screams as the shadows in the forest came alive, reaching out for the girl. The visions came faster now, one after another. Eleanor weeping over Annabelle's empty bed, the whispers growing louder, the house twisting and warping as it consumed the family. Finally, Harper saw herself, arriving at the house, unlocking the door, and stepping inside. The whispers had started the moment she crossed the threshold. "You are the key," the entity said. "You were always meant to be." Harper's mind reeled as the truth unfolded. The house wasn't just haunted. It was a trap, a prison designed to contain something far worse. Eleanor's rituals had opened a doorway, and Annabelle had been the first victim. But the house needed a new vessel, someone to sustain its power. Someone like Harper. "No," she said, shaking her head. "This isn't real. I'm not staying here." The entity laughed, a sound that made her skin crawl. "You don't have a choice." The whispers grew deafening, the walls closing in around her. Harper felt herself being pulled toward the trapdoor, her body no longer her own. But then she remembered the lighter fluid and matches she had left in the living room. If the house was alive, then maybe it could be destroyed. Summoning every ounce of strength, Harper broke free from the entity's grasp and sprinted upstairs. The house fought back, the floorboards buckling beneath her feet and the walls closing in, but she didn't stop. She reached the living room and grabbed the lighter fluid, dousing the walls and floor in a frenzy. The whispers turned to screams, the house writhing in agony as the flames took hold. "You'll burn with us," the entity roared, its form emerging from the shadows. Harper lit a match and dropped it, the flames roaring to life. The heat was intense, the smoke choking, but she didn't stop. She ran for the front door, her vision blurring as the fire consumed everything around her. Harper burst into the night air, collapsing on the frosty ground. Behind her, the house burned, the flames casting an eerie glow over the forest. The whispers faded, replaced by the crackle of fire and the distant howl of wind. For the first time in days, Harper felt a sense of peace. But as she lay there, staring up at the sky, she heard a faint sound, a child's laughter carried on the wind. Her blood ran cold. The child's laughter drifted through the air, soft and melodic, but it sent a chill down Harper's spine. She pushed herself to her feet, coughing as the acrid smoke from the burning house filled her lungs. She turned toward the forest, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The laughter came again, echoing from deeper within the woods. "No," Harper whispered. "This can't be happening." She backed away from the forest, her instincts screaming at her to leave. But something inside her, a lingering curiosity, a thread of unresolved guilt, kept her rooted in place. The laughter turned to whispers, faint and teasing, drawing her closer. Against her better judgment, Harper stepped toward the trees. The forest was darker than she remembered, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and smoke. The whispers surrounded her, growing louder with each step. "She's here. She's waiting. Find her." Harper's flashlight flickered, its beam cutting through the shadows like a fragile thread. She stumbled over roots and fallen branches, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Finally, she reached the clearing. The space was exactly as it had been in her dreams. The twisted trees, the oppressive silence, the sense of something watching her. But this time, she wasn't alone. Annabelle stood in the center of the clearing, her back to Harper. The girl's tattered white dress billowed slightly, though there was no breeze. "Annabelle," Harper called, her voice trembling. The girl didn't move. Harper took a cautious step forward. "I know what happened to you. I know what your mother did." At this, Annabelle turned. Her hollow eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and her mouth curved into a small, sad smile. "She wanted to save me," Annabelle said, her voice echoing with layers of other voices. But she didn't understand. Understand what? Harper asked, her heart pounding. Annabelle raised a hand, pointing toward Harper. "You?" The ground beneath Harper's feet trembled, and the whispers erupted into a deafening roar. She fell to her knees, clutching her head as the voices threatened to overwhelm her. "You are the key," Annabelle said, stepping closer. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but her eyes burned with an unnatural light. "The house was waiting for you." "No," Harper choked out. "I don't belong here. I'm not part of this." Annabelle knelt in front of her, tilting her head like a curious child. "You came to the house. You woke it up. You opened the door." Harper shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to know the truth. And now you do," Annabelle said, her smile widening. "But the truth has a cost." The clearing dissolved, and Harper found herself back in the house. The flames were gone, but the walls were blackened and crumbling. The whispers had quieted, replaced by a low, rhythmic pulse that seemed to come from the very heart of the house. Harper turned, and the entity was there, its shadowy form towering over her. "You cannot leave," it said, its voice a guttural growl. "The house lives because of you. Without you, it will die." "Good," Harper spat, defiance flaring within her. The entity laughed, a sound that shook the walls. "Do you think you destroyed us? Fire cannot kill what is already dead. We are eternal." The walls began to close in, the floorboards cracking and splintering beneath her. Harper ran, her legs moving on instinct, but there was nowhere to go. The house was endless, its hallways stretching into infinity. Finally, she collapsed in the center of the living room, gasping for air. The entity loomed above her, its glowing eyes fixed on hers. "You cannot escape," it said. "You belong to us now." Harper felt the weight of the house pressing down on her, crushing her spirit. But then she remembered something Eleanor had written in her diary. The house must hold her. The house must keep her. The entity needed her. Without her, the house would fall. Summoning every ounce of courage, Harper stood. "You think you own me?" she shouted. "You think I'm going to let you win?" The entity recoiled slightly, as if startled by her defiance. "I don't belong to you," Harper said, her voice steady. "You belong to me." She reached in her pocket and pulled out the lighter she had kept from earlier. With shaking hands, she lit the flame and held it aloft. The entity screamed, its form rippling and distorting. The walls of the house trembled, cracks spreading like veins through the ceiling and floor. Harper dropped the lighter onto the nearest pile of debris. Flames erupted, consuming the room in an instant. This time, the fire was different. It wasn't just burning wood and plaster. It was burning the very essence of the house. The whispers turned to screams, then to silence as the flames devoured everything. Harper ran, her body battered and bruised, but her resolve unbroken. She burst through the front door just as the house collapsed in on itself, the flames roaring into the night sky. She stood on the edge of the forest, watching as the fire consumed the house. For the first time, she felt free. Days later, Harper sat in a motel room miles away from Blackwood. She had burns on her hands and cuts on her face, but she was alive. She flipped through the pages of a new notebook, scribbling down everything she had experienced. She needed to document it, to make sense of it. But as she wrote, she heard a sound, a faint whisper, barely audible. Harper froze, her pen hovering over the page. The whisper came again, louder this time. "She's here." Her heart sank as the lights in the room flickered.